Hi everyone. As she said, my name is Veronica. And I just found out before, actually during lunch, that we are not passing out our slides. And the way I created my slides was so that all of you can have them as a reference. There's going to be a lot of guidelines around them. So it's really important that you have this information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass around this, the back side of a flyer. Don't tell Sevix, whoever the promoter is. I'm going to pass this around so you can go ahead and write your email address. Please write it legibly, that way I can interpret it well. And then I will email you the slides. Because, yeah, otherwise you'll be writing furiously. Okay, so I named my topic, Don't Hit the Wall. And it's kind of cliche, you know, we hear that a lot, it's thrown around a lot. But the reason I named it that is because in order to not hit the wall, you basically need to store up your glucose stores, otherwise known as glycogen. And what I've learned in working with athletes is that we're very carb phobic, and especially people with type 1, or especially people with diabetes. So there's that side of it. So I'm really talking about trying to get over that fear of eating carbs, and then also trying to get over the fear of always trying to really balance our weight and the whole issue of weight management. Because not only will I be saying, okay, we should be eating 400 to 500 grams of carbs when you're trying to fuel for an endurance event, but then you've also got to eat enough overall, because if you're not eating enough calories, you're not going to, those carbs that you're trying to store your body up for, those carbs that you're eating to try to store up, they can't be used for that event because they're really just being used to sustain your, just your normal body weight. So, so hence the title, Don't Hit the Wall, because we're really going to be focusing on why we need to eat those carbs and why we need to eat enough food to fuel our score. So as Melissa said, I do work for Tandem Diabetes Care, so that's my only disclosure. So the three main topics is we're going to talk about who is an athlete, what is an athlete, and what is the difference between an athlete and an athlete with diabetes. We'll talk about some of the basics about exercise physiology so that you understand where all the management principles come from. Try to get you to buy into the whole idea of fueling properly. Okay, so a sound nutritional program is going to basically include these three elements. Okay, and they're all there to optimize our sport or exercise. And I do want to also say that, how many of you here work out for more than an hour a day? Okay, about half of you. So I know a lot of you are preparing for some intense events, and then the other half of us may just actually right now not necessarily be in training, or we may just be avid exercisers. This information can still apply, because even if you're just exercising routinely for less than an hour, it's still important to have still enough fuel, because otherwise you can still go into a half-hour workout and still technically bond. So the three main areas that we need to consider is fueling before your training, okay, or your event, supplementation during your training, and then eating immediately after your training, okay? And then if you have diabetes, you also have to think about if you need to take something because of your blood glucose level, which way it's heading. Also, and this is something that we're gonna kind of touch on several times today, dosing your insulin based on what you're eating. But in the sense that, very common, let's say you're gonna go into a workout, or you're gonna go in to do an intense workout, and you have a high blood sugar. If you let's say you typically plan to eat food before that hard workout because you know it's going to be a 2-hour training event, but you have a high blood sugar. Will some of you still eat that food?
Sure.
Right. A lot of you guys won't. And I know Vic's nodding his head. Well, and I think because Vic's probably one of our biggest advocates that, what do you do now? Even if you're going into a training and you have a high blood sugar, what would you do now?
Decrease bolus, but still you've got nutrition.
Exactly. So really wrapping your head around, you still have to have your nutrition, but actually now on top of that, take some insulin. Now, I know that's very, what's the word? It's kind of it's a scary thought to take insulin when you're about to exercise. But if you don't have the proper fuel on board to fuel your training, you're going to end up bunking later on. I mean, you're going to hit the wall a lot sooner than you would had you not had that food on board. So kind of the whole idea of think of yourself as an athlete first, fuel like that, regardless of your blood sugar, and then if you're going to eat, in this case your blood sugar is high, then also, consider the insulin that you could take to, not obviously a ton, but something to still help store that food and then still keep your blood sugars as good as possible. And then we'll touch a bit on adjusting insulin and so forth, but that's obviously something else that you need to really consider. I mean, because that's kind of what diabetes is. Blood the insulin. So on top of eating, an athlete with diabetes has to consider all these other things too. And the list can go on. But really also focusing on the insulin on board and then the food on board. So what does insulin on board mean? How many of you know what that term means, or active insulin? Who wants to, in their own words, describe it?
It's the duration of a bolus from when you took it, or how long your insulin reacts in your body.
Yeah, so it's how long the insulin is lasting in your body from a previous bolus. And you have to also consider the food on board. When did you last eat? If your last meal was breakfast and you're walking into the gym almost around dinner time and you had such a busy day at work and you haven't eaten anything, you have no food on board. So don't expect to have a good workout. So when I was developing this presentation, I kind of went through, because actually Kathleen and I were just talking about this, how there's a lot of science, okay, about what you should be doing, what you shouldn't be doing, and a lot of this is, tested in the lab in very controlled conditions, and a lot of these guidelines I'm going to give, they're really ideal guidelines for what you should be doing, but then you also have to think in real life terms, like what can I actually apply on a day-to-day basis, and how can I cheat a little bit? So I got a couple of what I call just commandments that should be incorporated no matter what. And then at the end, I have a couple of new ones that I forget what I call them at the end. But basically, if you take anything away from this presentation, in the middle is going to be more of like the hard guidelines. But if you take anything away and all those guidelines really confuse you, because I have found that they can be very overwhelming. And especially because I only have an hour's worth of time. I mean, this is a presentation that I used to give over, 3 hours? And I had to really try to condense it and make it precise. So if you get anything out of this, definitely get something out of the commandments and then the other tips at the end. So, you guys know this. If your BG, and this actually is something that came from an ADA guideline from years before when CGM wasn't even that popular. And now most of you have CGM. But, you gotta know which way you're heading. Technically the ADA says if you're entering exercise with less than 100, you should eat carbs. But I think you all know, especially with CGM, if you're heading in with a blood sugar of 100 and you got an arrow up or 2 arrows up, you actually might be kind of safe. But overall, be cognizant of your blood sugar, especially if it's 100 or lower. If your activity is longer than 60 minutes, you should be consuming about 15 to 30 grams of carbs within that hour, at least, even within the first half hour, but it just really depends on your goals and how much longer you're going to be training. Number 3 is what I was referring to earlier. Try to dose your insulin based on your carbohydrate supplementation, not necessarily based on your blood sugar. Yes, obviously based on your blood sugar, but when we're thinking of fueling as an athlete, you have to think about getting in what you need to really be that best athlete and then dosing the insulin based on that. And that goes right into number 4. It's a scary thought, and I'm not saying to do a rage bolus and go right in with a ton of insulin on board, but basically just consider bolusing, even if it's a micro bolus, for food. And then also, how many of you have found that high intensity exercises raise your blood sugar? Yeah, it's common. It's not everyone, but I found most people, high intensity exercise can raise blood sugar. So if you're fighting that trend and you're going in for a hard resistant workout, consider taking a small bolus for that. consider reducing insulin before exercise for weight management and prevention of hypoglycemia. However, if you're actually trying to train for something, don't try to lose weight during the training season, okay? And we'll kind of touch on that a little bit more later. But, and I know most of us, especially a lot of us women, when we're training for something, we think, okay, great, this is gonna be the time when I'm gonna get to the best shape of my life. Which is probably the case, because obviously the training effect and everything is gonna really help with that. But at the same time, usually when we think of getting in shape, we think exercise and cutting back on our food intake. And when you're cutting back on your food intake, you are then compromising how well you can train. And then also you're at risk for getting sick and also risk of injuries and so forth. So I know it's easier said than done, but just really try not to lose weight during the training season. Do that, in between your different events when you're not training. Check blood sugars more often, especially after extreme or unusual exercise, because insulin sensitivity can last, for more than a day. There's something they found in the research, there's something magical about like the 2-3 a.m. Period after unusual or extreme exercise when people go low. So maybe set an alarm or, tell your significant other to maybe just wake up and help you wake up to check your blood sugar, because it's really, really common to go low right in that 2-3 a.m. period. And, in the perfect world, keep blood sugars between 80 and 180. Obviously that's not always the case, but that's really, what's been shown to really have the best, give you the best cardiorespiratory levels, the best carbohydrate and fat burning capability, and muscle efficiency. Okay, so let's go a little bit into the basics, the fundamental. Now, I think it was Melissa in her previous presentation, for those of you who were here, we were kind of laughing about USDA, or maybe it was with Eric. Hopefully no one cares for the USDA. But no, just laughing at the fact that, they come up with the food guide pyramid and they keep revising it and so forth. The one thing that they did come up with that I actually like for athletes is their My Plate. Because if you look at the My Plate, this really is kind of the ideal meal for an athlete. You've got your vegetables here, you got your protein, and then here are your carbs, and here are your carbs. A good 50 to probably 70% of your intake being from carbs. So I put that on there because they probably don't even realize that this is good outline for athletes. But I put it on there because you'll see as we go through all the evidence to back that up, you'll see why. That's just a very general way of figuring out how to fill your plate up with your food. Okay, so I'm not going to get too scientific on you guys because, it'll probably go over most of our heads, even mine. But basically, it's really important to understand that there's 3 energy systems, okay? And these energy systems all kick in at different times. But they all require glucose, okay? And this glucose forms basically the energy that contracts our muscles called ATP. So remember that ATP needs glucose, and we use ATP when we contract our muscles, okay? The harder we work out, the longer we work out, the more or the less ATP we use, okay? Remember, just keep remembering, glucose makes ATP. So here are, and you can call these, every scientist calls these energy systems totally different things, but for example, in the phosphagen system, basically known as like the anaerobic system, if you notice, this is time down here, okay, and this is ATP turnover, so how quickly you're actually using the ATP, or let's call it or your glucose. When you're first working out, initially, for like the first couple of minutes, your body's in the anaerobic mode. It's trying to get accustomed to something. Or whenever you do anything that's really high intense, like really hardcore resistant exercise, CrossFit, high intensity interval training, you're using a lot of your phosphagen system. So that's pure glucose that you're using, which is why your blood sugars go up, because your body's saying, whoa, I need extra glucose to fuel this workout, and your liver just starts spitting it out. But then as you start training for longer periods, in terms of time, the longer your workout goes, let's say it starts dipping into 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, another system kicks in, which uses less ATP and fat, actually, different slide. Fat kicks in as well, and that's my next slide. But you see, you're still using sugar, but not as much. And then when you go into your aerobic exercise, you know, again, you're still using ATP, hence sugar, but still not as much. Okay, so the longer you work out, the less sugar you actually burn. However, it's all relative. Yes, you're losing less sugar, but you're working out for longer periods. Okay? So then what this is showing is exercise intensity and the difference between how much glucose and fat you use. So again, initially, well, actually with exercise intensity, let's say our typical triathletes here and marathoners here, you know, we're probably on average working out around 60, probably I would say 60%. So you're using glucose from just your blood, you're using glucose from your stored glucose, which is glycogen, and you're using fat. And then when you get into the higher training days, like when you're doing sprints and interval trainings, that's when you're using almost mostly all glucose and glycogen. You're using some fat, but not as much. And really, you're always using glucose, okay? And then, you know, fat kind of gets thrown in here and there. But you're always using fat too, but really glucose is your main source of fuel. So glycogen is the way our body stores glucose. Okay, we store it in the muscle, we store it in the liver, we store it in the blood. An overnight fast can waste all of that glycogen. So if you're preparing for a race on Saturday morning at 7 a.m. and your last meal was at maybe 5, 6 p.m., okay, and you had a high carb meal, by 7 a.m. the next day, a lot of those carbs that you just ate, 12 hours ago, they pretty much have been burned up. Okay, not completely, and training has a lot to do with that. The more you train and the more you train your body to store it, the better and more efficient it gets. I mean, our bodies are really just great machines. They're really just based on efficiency. However, that's why it's so important, and I know I was talking with someone about this yesterday, that's why it's so important that if you're going to train in the morning, even if you only have 15 minutes between waking up, brushing your teeth, throwing on your shoes, and going for your run, even just having that snack, that 50-calorie snack, that 100-calorie snack, can make the world of a difference of picking you up and getting you started on your workout. And even, has anybody here ever heard of a mouth rinse? Actually, even just rinsing your mouth with a high sugar fluid. That can help too, because have you heard of that? Yeah, more and more research is showing that it actually affects you, it's more of your central nervous system that goes into play. So it's not necessarily your muscles that are getting the sugar because you're not really taking it in. But even just doing a mouth rinse can really help too, because now your brain thinks you're getting the glucose and that whole side kicks in as well. So, it's fascinating stuff that they're finding out. So we talked about the overnight fast, but then let's talk about a workout. Let's talk about like a marathon. Okay, and I know this is an example of someone who's really trained. So initially, when they started working out, they were using mostly their glycogen. And then, some of their blood glucose. Your body doesn't want to use all your blood glucose because that's what you need in your blood to keep you constant. But then as the time goes on, you notice the muscle glycogen levels start, and this is assuming that they enter the race like really topped off. By the time they get into like the 4-hour mark, they've exhausted their muscle glycogen. They're mostly running on fat, which you think is great, right? You think, well, heck, I want to burn my fat. I want to be lean. But fat is not efficient at all. I mean, technically, you could live for weeks with only drinking water and not eating anything because we would use our fat as energy. We have a lot of it stored up, and it makes sense to use it, but it's not efficient. What's going to actually get you to win those races or to get PRs is the glycogen, is the glucose, just building up those stores. So this shows that in this case, after 4 hours, this person hit the wall. And that's a trained person. If you're not that well trained, you'll hit the wall maybe about 2 hours in. And that's why it's so important to fuel properly right before, fuel during, and then right after you're done working out, when your cells are still really, really receptive, fuel as well, because that way you're now stocking up your stores for the next event. So I already mentioned that your storage can be depleted by, 15-hour fast. Some people say 12 hours. And then it takes about 1 to 2 days to get it back up to full storage. So this is just showing how it's not important the grams or how big the muscle was. I just wanted to show you that untrained muscle. Are any of you here? Well, my brother-in-law, he has type 1, and that's actually irrelevant, but he's the type of person where he gets up basically the day of the marathon and runs it. Is anyone here that type of person? Hey, I give him props. He does it. He's usually in pain for days after. But going to show you that untrained muscle, that would be like him. He probably the day or two before carbo-loaded, but really he can't store that much glycogen. I'm sure he hit the wall. I know he walked several times at the last Chicago Marathon. Whereas when you train, you can double those stores. Okay, and that's called the training effect. Not only that, but then also it's because your muscles are adapting to the training and are able to store glycogen better. And then if you carbo-load, you can even kind of top it off a little bit more. So again, just to show you that it's not a constant amount that you're able to store. You can always make your body store it a little bit more. Okay, so before we get into all the different guidelines, what questions do you guys have?
Veronica, does the trained muscle replete more quickly?
That's a good question. Does it? I think that's going to depend. So her question was, does the training muscle deplete more quickly? I think it depends on just your training intensity. Okay. So usually when you're more trained, you're going to have a harder you're just going to be training harder because you're more trained. So yeah, it would probably deplete more. Yeah, and actually it does, because then that's why the whole concept of carbo loading has to do with the fact that those days that you carbo load, you don't train as intensely, and that way you don't burn it up as quickly during those days. Yeah.
Hey Veronica, can you go back to the slide with the graphs of different energy? One more. One more, yeah. Mm-hmm. So I'm reading this book by Gary Taubes, and he talks about how insulin kind of shifts you into carb or fat burning mode. Mm-hmm. And I've seen this slide a million times because it seems like this is what people without diabetes would do. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how much the baseline level of insulin in your body affects that. And so if I shut off insulin, like my basal rate, an hour before exercise, would I start exercise like burning fat because there's no insulin on board?
Great question. So yes, technically, if you are, let's say you have high blood sugars, okay, but you're not in ketoacidosis, you're not spilling ketones. That means, so ketones is a sign of whether you have enough insulin circulating or not. So as long as you have some insulin on board, you will be burning like you should. Mm-hmm. But if you are starting to spill ketones, your body is going to be burning more fat. And then you're going to, if you're going to go more into it's going to be hard for you to go into the carbohydrate burning area part. You're going to be doing more of the fat oxidation. Does that answer your question?
Kind of.
So
but what if I'm at like 160 and not spilling ketones, but I've shut my insulin off like 90 minutes before exercise?
You're still going to have insulin on board.
Are you talking about the fact of if insulin's introduced, your system shut off and they just go from carbohydrate burning instead of fat burning?
So would I not, I feel like I would enter fat burning faster than this would suggest because I've turned insulin off.
Not necessarily, because you're probably, there's different theories about this, but the average person with diabetes probably, John Walsh, he's speaking, I think actually right now, he says that the average person's insulin lasts about 4 hours in them. Mm-hmm. So it would probably take longer than that.
What about just the basal? If it's a bolus, maybe, but what about just basal?
The basal as well.
Yeah, what if you're only getting like 0.5 units per an hour?
Mm-hmm. But he still got that, whatever he was getting that hour and a half before. Like he still got over that last hour his full dose. So it's still, even that micro dose that he got is still supposed to last him. So it's not going to be as much on board, but he's still going to have some insulin on board. I think, and it actually goes, now I want to know, why are you shutting off your insulin?
Before I start cycling?
Yeah, like completely shutting off. Have you found that?
So I usually eat right before to kind of rise up, and then I shut off right when I start exercise, and so
For how long?
for if I'm doing a 3-hour ride, I'll shut it off for 2 hours.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah, so that's also a very different school of thought.
But I don't know the best way to do it.
Okay, yeah, and I know everybody
That's just
here.
one way that I've
Okay.
done it.
Same, yeah. I tried played around with phasal rates and just for me works best. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm cycling.
You know, and everybody, so this is a very small community, and we all work with different people, and I don't want to undermine what other coaches are saying, because I know there's other coaches who are preaching different things in different rooms. I was trained very well by Dr. Matt Corcoran. I don't know if you guys know who he is, but he has a diabetes, it's called the Diabetes Training Camp. It was the first camp for adults with type 1 in exercise. It was like a full week. It was great. And he started about 7 years ago. And he just started back up in Pennsylvania. And his main philosophy, which I have now bought into, is you really should never be without insulin. Even if you take it down, you're on a pump, right?
Yeah.
Even if you take it down to 10%.
Right.
You really should not be without any insulin, because a normal body, I hate to say normal, a body of someone without diabetes never shuts off their insulin either. So, and I know obviously that kind of,
Well,
yeah, and I know everybody has different,
Along those lines, their pancreas doesn't, if they're doing something, their pancreas doesn't produce insulin if it's not supposed to, does it?
no, but there's always still something to keep you in balance.
Okay.
And then because you can quickly go into ketoacidosis as well. So I like to suggest typically the most you go, so let's say we're going to disconnect. I mean, with this cycling, you could actually still wear your pump. It's probably
Yeah.
not going to bother you. But let's say you were swimming. Obviously swimming, you know, if you're doing injections, you could still have some long-acting working in the background. But if you're on a pump, you know, really what I recommend is the most you ever disconnect or you go without insulin is an hour. But then every hour, if it's convenient, obviously if you're doing like an Ironman swim, you're not going to be able to reconnect in that hour. Basically though, every hour reconnect and give yourself a little bit of insulin.
Yeah.
And that amount, I don't know, it would be something that, you know, would have to be worked out. But, so yes, if you were to stay disconnected for 2 hours, it could be that, I mean, I'd like to say in theory your insulin on board would work for 4 hours, but who knows? You know, it could be that you could actually start towards the end dipping more into the fat oxidation mode, which isn't a good thing though. You know, it's not like, oh, it's a good thing I'm burning fat. It's more you're starting to produce ketones, your whole cardiorespiratory and metabolic system is kind of starting to change, and you're not able to utilize your glucose because it's not in your cells, because you don't have that insulin to push it into your cells. Does that make sense?
So are you anaerobic? Are you truly anaerobic at that time?
That's a good question. I mean, so no, you would be more, yeah, you would be aerobic, because remember, when you don't have enough insulin on board and you're hyperglycemic, then you are going to be oxidizing, you're going to be oxidizing more fat than carbohydrate, because you can't oxidize that carbohydrate. Shoot. Actually, hold on, I have that on a slide over here. I know, now I'm all confused. 2:45, okay, good. Here we go.
Sorry to sidetrack you.
No, I was going to talk about this anyways.
She told me to let her know at a certain time,
Yeah.
so it has nothing to do with your question. I don't want you to feel bad.
Sorry guys, I have it right here. It's actually the carbs, yes, that you're oxidizing, because that's all that you have in your blood to use. Yeah, sorry guys. But it's still not the proper way, when you should be actually oxidizing a lot of those fats as well. Yeah. So you go more into the carbohydrate oxidation mode. You know, and well, being without insulin is one thing. But then exercising with a slightly high blood sugar, I mean, it's not going to be the end of the world. I know Tara and I were talking about this yesterday. You know, it's, you know, technically over 180, that's when you're dipping into the hyperglycemia area. And, you know, the main question to ask is, are you insulin deficient? Okay? If you're 180 because you miscalculated your meal 2 hours ago, then you're probably not insulin deficient. You're probably okay, you know. But really, it's when you start getting higher than 250, 300. You know, if you're 250 with ketones, all right, you probably shouldn't work out. And if you're higher than 300, even without ketones, that's where, even though you may not have ketones, your blood sugar is so high that it's throwing everything off. Not only are you dehydrated, as you guys know, but you're oxidating, you're using your substrates, either your carbs or your fat differently. The level of oxygen that you're able to consume, your heart rate, your stroke volume, cardio output. I mean, I know these are all kind of fancy terms, but basically your whole cardiorespiratory system is not as it should be. Very poor body temperature regulation, and a lot of that has to do with the dehydration. And then, not to mention, if you stay high afterwards, you're not going to store that glycogen. The way I'm going through these slides and discussing how it's so important to kind of stock up your fuel after you work out so that you're ready to, again, give it all and get the best workout the next time. But if you're riding high after your workout, you're basically missing that critical window when you can put all that sugar back in to store to use for your next workout.
So then you should, that's good. So
No.
then you should technically bolus
Yep.
right before you're done because you're probably gonna eat.
Yeah, I've
And
almost
if
15
if
minutes
you
before
eat without bolusing, then you're gonna mess everything up again.
Exactly, and Tara just says she boluses about 15 minutes, but she'll program a bolus about 15 minutes before she's done. Yeah, yeah, and that's also a scary thought. I get it, and but yes, that's what a lot of athletes do. They'll turn their basal rate back up, about half hour before they cross that finish line or before they're done training, or just give a bolus.
So how do you keep from getting fat?
I'm sorry, so what?
How do you keep from getting fat when you're eating all this stuff? It's like
So-
you gain weight every time.
Right. I know, and I wish, God, that could be a whole other,
We can do that tonight instead of 11.
right? Yeah, come find me as I'm drinking my wine and eating junk. No. So yeah, the whole weight management side, I mean, it's really, insulin doesn't make you fat. It's what we eat. And so if you didn't have diabetes, you would get fat because you ate too much food. So you just kind of have to think about that, because a lot of times when we go from, especially as a pump trainer, I see it all the time. Just saw it with the 14-year-old kid who was on injections his whole life, just got onto the T-Slim. His mom and his nurse call me, oh my God, he's been on the pump for 3 months and he's gained 30 pounds. And his blood sugars are kind of crazy because now he's eating everything and anything, pulls out the pump, puts in the carbs, So it's a byproduct of him just eating too much. And I know it's tough to hear that. I'm not saying that that's what you're doing, but insulin is a growth hormone. But if you don't have enough insulin, you're basically just urinating out the food that you're eating. That's what it is with high blood sugars.
I have a question, Veronica.
Yeah.
Along those lines, I read a book called Metabolic Efficiency Training to train your body to utilize more fat for endurance type of activities. And it's a process. It's you don't just do it in a week. It takes weeks.
Yeah.
But one concept along that, though, is that when insulin is introduced to a system, and I'm not necessarily talking for training or whatever, but your body physiologically, I thought, responded to turning off fat burning.
To turning off fat?
Turning off fat burning for your body, because it sees insulin, it's like, I gotta utilize glucose.
Right, I can
So,
see that,
and
yeah.
I was like, well, I just want to ask that question for how does that apply to someone with diabetes who we're introducing bulks of insulin multiple times through the day on our metabolism and our fat burning capacity, and it's like I do my gels when I'm running and I would love to optimize to be leaner, and it's just, I get the fueling piece. I understand that. I understand I want to have topped up glycogen stores, but just from I don't know.
Yeah,
if you
no.
can shed light on that or.
So her question was, so when insulin is up, fat burning is down. So right, basically. So when you're eating, anytime you dose insulin, you're thinking, well, great, I'm not going to be burning fat, which is so true. But it's no different than someone without diabetes. So the time that you're burning fat is when your basal rate's just going, when you're not bolusing, which is a lot of the time of your life. When you're sleeping, you just have your basal rate going in between meals. So yeah, so that's what they're saying. Basically for someone who doesn't have diabetes, they still have that's why I said you should never turn off your basal rate completely, because they still have a baseline dose of insulin. It's just,
Basal,
yeah.
And people without diabetes gain weight all the time with training for marathons. I mean, it's not, it's all of us. I mean, it's a huge, wonderful question. Like, how can we train?
Yeah, and it's really finding like that magic number. And that's why right now when I start giving guidelines, you know, they're general guidelines, you know, and they're pretty high carb guidelines. And I know a lot of people who work really well with that. And then I know some people who do train more on just the lower carb side of things, and they do well too. You know, but here's the thing, and here's kind of the conclusion I've come to. So let's say you're really fighting with eating this many carbs, okay? You know, the research shows whether you do a high protein or high fat or high carb, when they compare these other studies that are more high fat and high protein versus high carb, you know, when they do muscle biopsies, when they do the blood work, it shows that it still can give them a good amount of storage. It can still train them well. However, when they compare it to people who are having a high carb diet, they're either doing just as well or not as well. You don't really hear them doing better than people who are not high carb. So I don't know if I explained it well.
Yeah.
Point is that, right, you may not need to include as many carbs to train, but chances are on this other diet that you're doing, this high protein and high fat, you're probably not going to get the PR, and if you do, then you probably would have gotten it with a high carb diet too, or even, you know, done even better with the high carb diet. Yeah, sorry guys, it's kind of complex stuff, and yeah, and I'd be happy to, you know, talk to you guys afterwards about it. So let's go into the guidelines. How much time do I have? Okay, so I've got 20 minutes. So, okay, you guys can look at this later. I mean, this is basically just telling you why we need to do the before, during, and after, but I'll send you guys the slides. So, okay, so let's take an example. Let's talk about those of us who train an hour a day. And let's think of how many grams of carbs. Who here wants to give me their weight?
225.
What is it?
225.
225. Okay, so 225. So now all of my guidelines are in kilograms. Does anybody know how to convert pounds to kilograms?
That's there.
2.2.
Yeah, it's right there. But and the reason why I kept it there is because that's where all the science is.
122 pounds.
Right. But basically just cut it in half. So you said, I'm sorry, 225 you said?
Right.
So let's say about 115, maybe 120. I think if anybody here is really good at math, you could give us, but
100.
is it 100? Okay, so I would have been off by like 50 pounds. So 100 kilograms. So, so 100 kilograms. So let's say, how much are you training on average? How many hours a day?
An hour and 15 minutes or so.
Okay. An hour and 15 minutes. So that means that if he's at about 100 kilograms and he looks fit, he doesn't need to lose any weight, so we'll use the 100 kilograms. If he were overweight, we would use a weight that was a little bit lower, okay? But we'll use 100 kilograms, so times 5, that's what, 500 grams a day? Or times 6 even, but it's got to be on the lower range because it's 1 to 3 hours a day, you're on the lower range. We'll just use 5. So that's 500 carbs a day.
So a box and a half a pop.
Which is, yeah, right. So now I know that sounds daunting, but are you actually training for something in particular?
Marathons.
Okay. Yeah.
And
So
I find that I don't have enough energy. It's just like,
it's hard. Well, and then you got to
I
think.
worry about taking all this insulin and then my blood sugar's dropping, but then
It takes practice, and the good thing is that you're in.
You're here.
Yes, and there's like probably 25% of the people here have mastered it. Well, I can't say mastered, right? Because you can't ever really master diabetes, but have learned, learned how to do it.
And it's gotten easier over the years, but still.
But right, 500 grams sounds daunting, and that's just training an average an hour a day. Wait until your training picks up, and towards the last month when you're doing more of your longer runs and you're doing. I mean, I guess you still probably wouldn't train more than 2 hours a day, except for your long runs.
3 hours of that. 3 hours on the long run.
Yeah.
But I don't know how the recovery, it seems like I have to eat so much that,
Because you're exhausted afterwards, aren't you?
right.
Yeah, I know how that feels.
Sunday, the day after, and
Well, and that's why after a long run, you have to take at least that next day as recovery. Because if not, you're never going to replenish your glycogen stores to keep you good the next couple days. So, but that 500 isn't just for his meals or isn't just for his workout. That's for the whole day. So you figure, you have 100 for breakfast, 100 at each meal, that's 300. And then that hour that you train, you can easily take another 30, maybe another 30 to 50 right before, and then immediately after another 50. I mean, you're almost at 100 right there. So you have to remember that includes every part of the day and snacks and also what you're taking in while you're working out. Yeah.
What if, like, my doctor told me that she didn't want me eating more than, like, 35 grams of carbs per meal? But
Okay.
I just, like, that's not including fruit, though, so would I just substitute, like, starchy carbs with, like, fruit?
So she doesn't want you eating more than 35 grams per meal. And then what was the next part you said?
That's not including, like, fruits. That's
Okay.
including
Oh, so you're able to
grains,
do-
breads. So
okay.
I just, like, eat
So it's just
fruits for
starches.
The rest of that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I would. If anything, I'd like to talk to you on the side to see. You don't have to tell us all, but why it was recommended.
I don't know. I'm new. I only found out I was diabetic like 2 months ago.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's your name?
Maddie.
What is it?
Maddie.
Maddie.
Yeah.
Okay.
Don't believe the doctors.
Right. Yeah.
Talk to the people in this room.
Right. Yeah. So everyone meet Maddie. And yes. Right. Yeah. And Maddie. Yeah. You're gonna learn. Not every endocrinologist knows type 1 diabetes. Not every diabetes educator gets type 1 diabetes. And then you throw an exercise into the mix, no one knows it.
It takes a long time.
Yeah.
Just being here is amazing.
Yeah.
Coming here and being here is amazing, and it takes a long time to kind of get into a routine. So don't be overwhelmed. Just take in what you can take.
Yeah.
I'm amazed that you.
Yeah.
I really am.
Yeah. So
everybody's initially told just
I know. But she's like, I'm only supposed to eat like 100 in a day. Yeah. So feel free to catch me later on tonight or even tomorrow. But yes, if that's something you want to stick with, yes, you would need to make up with a bunch of other, like with fruits, high starchy vegetables. Yes. Well, and that actually, God, now I'm kind of jumping around. But again, going to the whole idea of, wow, how do I consume this many carbs? There is, and I thank Vic for introducing me to this. Bob Seebohar is a sports dietitian, and his mentality is simple as sustainable. Because again, right, when, most of you know how to count carbs pretty well, so counting the 500 a day probably isn't that difficult. But he's not a diabetes educator. He's talking about just the general population. And the general population, they don't know how to count carbs. Remember, you guys have a lot of advantages to people who don't have diabetes because you guys are really in tune with your body. You know how to manage your insulin to really add it as an advantage. And then you guys can count carbs. You're more in tune with nutrition. But he came up with these plates, and like I said, I give Vic credit for showing this, for introducing me to this idea. So basically, he's saying depending on what stage you are of your training, you follow different plates. Okay, kind of like the USDA My Plate. But like right now, I'm sorry, what is your name?
Todd.
Todd?
Todd,
Todd?
yes.
T-O-D?
Two Ds.
Yeah, T-O-D, sorry. Okay, as Todd said, like he's in the competition cycle, okay? So actually, as part of the competition cycle, he threw in the category, the dietitian, of sports nutrition products. Because it is hard, especially like the day that you're gonna do your race. I mean, that day you're probably gonna have to take in like 900 grams of carbs. I know it sounds daunting, but I mean, that's gonna be a really long day. And you can't just fulfill it by doing your fruits and vegetables, your food. You're gonna have to really get into the whole product side of things because otherwise it's hard to get in all these carbs at one time. So don't think you have to kind of do it with just meals. Like I said, you're thinking about what you're taking in while you're working out as well. And a lot of these will be these products that are out there that are made to fuel you during your workout.
Veronica, that's from the metabolic efficiency training.
Oh, okay. Was that by Bob Seebohar? Okay. Yes, I know what book that is now. I think that's one of his newer books. It was the other book aside from this book. So. Okay. So. And like I said, I'm going to send you the slides so you'll have these guidelines. But overall rule of thumb is depending on how many hours you're you have before you exercise, that's how many grams of carbs you should be doing. Now, this is going to be someone who's intensively training for something, okay? For the rest of us who maybe are only working out about an hour a day, 30 grams 5 minutes before is really going to keep us smooth for our workout. Even just have a good workout. Because again, and Sherry Colbert, she has a lot of really good blogs. She was speaking earlier, an hour earlier. And, and she always focuses on the fact that if you don't eat breakfast, how are you even going to work hard, during that workout? You'll go into an early morning workout thinking, well, I'm burning fat, I haven't eaten anything, I'm going to have a great workout, I'm going to feel great and skinny. And then, but then you don't have the energy. Because remember, you've gone that whole overnight without eating anything, your glycogen's low. So even if you do a quick 30 grams, which you can get in what? Probably 3/4 cup of juice, or eat a couple of jelly beans, or the chef that we had earlier today, he made these really good, Tara, these really good, what were they again?
Tough bars.
Tough bars, yeah. Yeah, chocolate, cherries in them. I mean, you eat one of those, that's probably about 30 grams. We can stomach that, 15 minutes before we work out. And that will make you work out that much better, even if it's just for an hour. So that you work out better, you burn more calories, you build more muscle. And then if you are...
I'm sorry, do you want them to be 5 minutes before or 15 minutes before?
That says 5 minutes, that's what the study had shown I would feel more comfortable doing 15 minutes, just because, basically you're running out the door and stuff in your face, so. Yeah, and then, again, if you're having more intensive training, it shows that even just 200 or 300 grams, 3 to 4 hours before, would help. But again, if you want to be really more exact and fine-tune it based on your weight, you can follow these guidelines.
Saying 300 grams of carbs 4 hours before.
Mm-hmm. But that's not going to be just for like an hour-long workout. That's probably like a 2 or 3 hour long workout. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where would you throw fat and protein in the pre-workout?
It would be low. Yeah, great question. I used to include it in this slide, but due to lack of time, I didn't.
That's okay.
But you're right, that's a very critical part. I didn't bring it up because it's really not important. Yeah, protein maybe 4 hours before, you could have a nice chicken breast. You have to learn your own body. I made the mistake of the other day. I was going to the gym, all I had with me were 2 boiled eggs. I ate them about half hour before, and I was a mess at my workout. So, you learn what you can tolerate. Maybe even protein about 2 hours before, but I wouldn't recommend high protein an hour before. Definitely not high fat, because it just sits in your stomach. It'll really ruin your workout.
So bacon and eggs is not a good pre.
No, that's great for after. That's great for after, and especially with some grits or some toast. Okay, so now during. Eating, if you're only going to work out for 45 minutes or so, eating during, probably not that important. I did put the asterisks, and I put assuming your blood glucose is stable and assuming you have good glycogen stores. Again, if for those of you who are just exercising to lose weight, 45 minutes could still be miserable if you really haven't eaten much in the past couple days. So therefore, it's not the end of the world that if you're trying to lose weight and you're just exercising half hour to an hour a day, to maybe sip on a little bit of Gatorade during the workout. Those extra 50 calories is relative. Really, if you're trying to work out hard for those 45 minutes, you can easily burn 500 calories. And if you can work hard during that period by drinking a little bit of Gatorade that's only 50 calories, do it. It's worth it because you get to work out harder and you'll have that readily available glucose. So again, may not be necessary, but like I said, when it comes to weight management, it could definitely help to just give you that harder workout, or even if you're not trying to lose weight. But then everything else, if it's a high intensity, 45 minutes, that would really, really help to have that glucose, because that's all you're burning. There's barely any fat that you're burning. You're burning glucose. It makes sense to have some glucose coming in. And then on average, as I said earlier, about 30 to 60 grams per hour of carbs. And then if you're training for something even longer, on the days that you're training closer to 3 hours, it could be up to 100 grams per hour.
I just want to say, it's really not that hard to get that in. It sounds like a lot, but I don't know if people are using goos and clip blocks and things like that, but one goo is 20 grams of carbs. And so if you're having 2 goos in an hour, one on the hour, one on the half hour, you're good to go. That's 40 grams of carbs. So I feel like it sounds so much when you think 60 grams, you're thinking, you know, a bagel, you know, you're thinking a burrito, you know, which is 100 grams. I mean, you're thinking of like that kind of food, but that's not really what you're eating. And you can do those nutritional supplements or some of those drinks. I mean, you should be drinking, you know, a bottle of water an hour and a half, and those nutritional drinks. I mean, those nutritional drinks can be upwards of 50 grams of carbs, right? I mean, right?
Yeah,
And so
absolutely, yeah.
I mean,
Sometimes you only need a little sip.
It sounds overwhelming, but it really is not.
Yeah, you actually just reminded me that there's Carbo Pro. Is anybody familiar with Carbo Pro, Vic? Yeah, like that stuff. I think isn't it a powder? So you can actually make your drink very concentrated. Now you have to be careful though, because taking too much of that at one time can really affect your digestion as well. Like it's good if you're maybe cycling, maybe not so good if you're running. But there's different concoctions and mixes that you can find that are just more concentrated that, you know, in 2 bites you could easily have 30 grams of carbs. So then after exercise, super important, and, you know, highlighting that the insulin is important too. Now you may not need that much insulin, just depending on how your body reacts to the exercise, because you are in a more insulin sensitive state, and if you already have insulin on board, even if it's 10%, after you exercise, you can store that glucose in readily to store it for your next workout. But if you don't have any insulin on board, you're going to have high blood sugars, and all that work would have been, I don't want to say for nothing, but yeah, that's all food that should be stored for your future workout. So immediately after, about 1 to 1.5 grams per kilogram. So again, let's use Todd as an example, 100 grams. So yeah, about 100 grams of carbs immediately after. I mean, you can have that in like, let's see. What did you say?
Frosted mini wheats.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's going to be high glycemic. Well, maybe not the mini wheats because of the fiber, but you know, and yeah, I mean something, right? Yeah, something that. But that's fine. You can have that in a bowl. Yeah, yes, and chocolate milk is great for post-workout because it has, so now it's very important to include some protein in your post-workout because protein actually facilitates the absorption of glucose or the movement of glucose into your cells. And I don't know, probably right off the bat, well, they recommend a 4-to-1 ratio. So if it's 100 grams of carbs, then what is that, 25 grams of protein? Which probably in your frosted mini wheats you'd probably have between the milk and, you know, grains have protein as well.
I have a question about the ratios. I know it depends on like your weight, but just looking at how much to how much, can you give some maybe examples of how much protein for a certain amount of carbs? Because I can't really, I can see the carbs for sure, but not really how much protein, what kind of foods, or how much of that protein, what does it look like?
A lot
Right.
of people say chocolate milk.
Like what is
Yeah.
chocolate milk? That's
So like a cup of chocolate milk is the perfect example because it's about maybe 6 grams of protein. And then it's about, what, 40 grams of carbs maybe? So 6, 12, 18, 24, maybe like 30 grams of carbs.
For 1 cup.
Yeah, for 1 cup. So you're in 1 cup, you're getting your 30 grams of carbs, and then you divide it by 4, and that would end up being about, about 8, and that's about approximately how much protein you're getting.
And there's no chocolate milk that would be only a cup, so you're automatically getting twice that. So you're getting 60 grams of carbs.
Right. Which probably for your weight is perfect because, you know, you're smaller than Todd, thankfully, and you would probably... No, because she's a female. But you're a tall guy, though.
Chocolate milk.
Right. But yeah, you could have like 2 cups. You would need 3 cups. So.
Oh, okay.
Buy it at the grocery store only on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or flavored soy milk, or my big thing right now is caffeine is also really good after workout because it also facilitates the absorption of glucose in the cells. And Starbucks now at God, it's so bad, right? But in the grocery store, they sell their cartons of iced coffee. And it's pretty high in sugar, and obviously it's used with milk, and there's protein, and then you have that kick of caffeine in there. So it's great as a pre-workout snack as well.
So you're doing more liquid carbs. Okay, sorry.
So yeah, it could be, liquid's also a really easy way for before or after. During, you just have to be careful because as you're so active, during your workout, you just need to be careful not to drink too much where it's holding you down. Like you have the right balance between hydrating and then not, you don't want it just joshing around your stomach.
So you guys don't do the whole food protein stuff?
Greek
It's
yogurt.
more-
Oh, yeah. I mean, you could definitely do like different smoothies. Absolutely.
I interrupted, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, I was just gonna say, this piece for me, when I follow it to the 30-minute window and then the hour and a half window where you're gonna get whatever in your car is your drink on your drive home and you shower and then you have a meal, if I do that, I don't even find lows in the next day because your
Yes.
rate of glycogen, the rates, you have the highest rates in these window frames that it's putting back into your muscles. It's my personal theory. If you miss those windows,
No, you're right.
your system is going to continue to pull from you in a different way on the day that you don't know, and that's why, in my personal theory, that's why 2 to 3 a.m. is that place when people go low because you've stopped putting food in at bedtime, and it's now had that rate. It's pulling out of you for those few
Right,
hours.
but you don't have that much. And there's studies that show that. The sooner your glycogen is replaced after exercise, the less likely you are to develop late onset hypoglycemia.
Do you exercise in the afternoon though, or in the morning?
I'm morning. I'm 5 a.m. runner.
Well, how does that get to 3 a.m.?
Well, was that in this? Were you
That was in a different slide. Just in general, when people do intense or new exercise, something that you're not familiar with, and your body's just like, whoa, what is this? They tend to go low in the middle of the
And
night.
it has nothing to do with when they exercise. It's the
Yeah.
fact
Oh,
you're
I
not
see. Okay, I was
replacing
trying to
nutrition
correlate
from
the
your
12
sleeping. So you're
hours.
going
Right.
6 hours without introducing anything into your body.
Right. And it probably has to do with the fact that people just aren't replenishing afterwards either. These are studies done on probably on people just introducing a whole new activity. They may not necessarily even be athletes. It could just be someone doing something totally new, and then because they're not replenishing afterwards, they're hit at 2 o'clock. So it does have a correlation.
Well, and not so much in this group, because I think we've all been exposed that how important insulin is in fueling and the recovery piece, but most people with diabetes that I meet have depleted, turned off for a couple of hours, and so they get done and they have no insulin on board. So the last thing they think is putting a carb between their lips because
Right.
they're going to shoot up so much. And so I have found that to be so key in order for me to be like, okay, workout done, recovery in, I can go on with the day and not worry about so much where my blood sugars are.
Right.
oscillating.
Yeah. How am I doing on time? 3:16, so we're a minute over. What time does the next one start? 3:30?
3:30. The final thing's at 3:30, so.
Okay, we got 15 minutes. If you need to leave, please leave, because I don't want to keep you. And also,
Great, I
those.
said.
And I have cards here if anyone wants to come up and get one. So adding the protein is important. I won't go into that. Glycemic index. You guys know how things affect your food. Carb loading. You taper your exercise. You don't exercise as intensely a couple days before, and that's approximately how many grams of carbs you should be doing. Let's see. Okay. A lot of people are still really into the low carb thing, so I do want to touch on this. It can help. It can definitely help, especially if you're not in endurance. If you're not training for an endurance event, you can actually do more of a lower carb, higher protein. Or if you're not even an athlete at all, and you're kind of, you like to work out. You work out maybe half hour a day, and you're just an avid exerciser. It can definitely work. It'll probably be good on your blood sugars. Okay. However, if you're starting to train for something more endurance-based, it probably won't work. So, weight loss can result. A lot of it has to do with reduction in calorie intake, but I was actually reading on the plane right here a really good research article about how I think they're finding that in high-protein diets, I think it's the amino acid leucine that is causing people to actually retain muscle. So as they're losing weight, even though you're losing weight, if you're on a high-protein diet, you can actually preserve your muscle mass and not lose as much muscle and just lose more fat, compared to someone who's just doing overall a low-calorie diet, and then they're losing both muscle and fat. Because that's the biggest thing when you're losing weight, especially when you're trying to train for something. You're losing a lot of muscle, and that's going to obviously affect you when you try to just continue training or affect you as the end result. But as you guys know, some people with diabetes have some type of kidney impairments, kidney function loss. So So if that's the case, it really is contraindicated. You really don't want to, because protein is very, very hard on the kidneys. Your kidneys have to spill out all of the toxins of protein, and if your kidneys aren't working well to filter it, it's gonna build up in your blood. It's called urea. Most suitable, if anything, at the beginning of a training, but again, when you're really starting to get into the mileage, into longer duration, you don't want to do low carb. But the biggest, most interesting thing is, where is it? Maladaptation. So all the studies that I've read, even though they may have seen improvement in maybe performance or they've lost weight, people were miserable. So, it does have to do with quality of life. And hey, if you can train with a higher carb diet, because really that's what you really need to fuel your workout for the most part, I mean, it's actually going to be a lot better and better for your mental state of mind. Okay. So hydration, Brennan from Insulindependence, he's one of the employees. He actually introduced me to Dr. Alan Lim. I think he's an exercise physiologist. I know he's a PhD exercise physiologist. And his big thing is hydration needs to be separate from fuel. So kind of going back to that example that I gave, that you can find these really dense, concentrated liquids, but that's not necessarily going to hydrate you because you can only drink so little of it. When you're working with these elite cyclists who are taking these little sips of this super dense, concentrated liquid, they're getting their carb allotment, but because you can't drink that much of it because it's so concentrated, you still need to worry about your hydration. And his big theory is you should have it be completely separate. Have one water bottle with that really concentrated liquid and another water bottle with just your fluids and your electrolytes. So these are the general recommendations. If you're a salty sweater, that's kind of an easy one. I mean, if you become salty, you know that you lose sweat and electrolytes really quickly. You just need to replenish a lot sooner. And a really good way to measure is your sweat rate. It's not super scientific unless it's in a lab, but I think it's a good general way to do it. Weigh yourself before and weigh yourself after. And the ounces that you lost, 1 pound is 16 ounces. So if you've lost 1 pound, that means that you should have drank 16 ounces more fluid, which is the equivalent to 2 cups. So it's a really good, easy way to just weigh yourself before and after and see. But, on average, about half a cup to 2 cups every 20 minutes. I'm a high sweater. I need to do like a cup and a half every 20 minutes, but I know some of you may not be, so it really just depends on, how much fluid you lose. Okay, so we'll wrap up with a couple of diabetes-related things. So I'm sure many of you have noticed, and it's been very well studied, prior hypoglycemia increases your risk of hypoglycemia during exercise, and that's because your response is blunted. So it's a lot easier for you to go into another hypoglycemia episode. But the good thing is that once you stop that trend, your senses could be unblunted. A hard sprint can counter a fall in BG levels. So if you are out and you are going low and you don't have a glucose source with you, which never happens, right? You always have glucose with you. I know it sounds stupid, but if you sprint for like 10 to 30 seconds, that increases the catecholamine hormones, adrenaline, norepinephrine, all that stuff, and your sugars will go up and can save you for a little bit.
That only longer.
Is that what?
Just 30 seconds.
Well, you have to sprint for that amount.
Right.
Yeah. I don't know how long it actually saves you for. Do you guys know?
No, I meant that I
is that?
thought that it would be, you have to try to, do another mile as hard
Oh,
as
no.
Oh, no.
And here's why. Well,
Should also say jumping.
Yeah, jumping, stop.
probably, anything that's gonna, have you guys ever used this?
Sherry Colbert was just saying that she does
Talking
it
about that.
at the end of a swim. If she feels herself going low,
Ah.
she'll sprint to 50.
I didn't
Right.
believe it, and I've used it. When
Yeah.
I've been a mile and a half from home, and nothing on me. You're
like,
60,
I may
you're 60.
sprint.
That's the way it goes.
Right.
I was floored that it actually worked.
Right.
But you don't do that unless you need
It's
to.
that fight or
right.
flight.
Yes.
No, I was, and I
Right.
had my CGM, and it was so. Of course, there's a lag, so you don't know till you get home that it
Right.
worked.
She got home.
I got home.
Well, and it goes back to this. No, this. You're using the phosphagen system. Your body's like needing so much ATP, so much glucose that your liver just spits it out. So it goes back to the fact that when you do something really hard and really short, that energy system kicks in, which requires a lot of sugar, so your liver starts spitting out the sugar, hence bringing your blood sugar up. Okay. And then we actually already did this one. And then resistant training is actually associated with less post-exercise hypoglycemia due to the fact that your blood sugars actually go up most of the time when you do resistance training. As compared to endurance training, it's the opposite. Your blood sugars are going down. So a lot of people do notice that after the fact, they don't actually go low as much. All right, we did this actually in the beginning. So that was easy. All right, so adjusting your insulin. It's really going to depend, and I'm not giving any hard guidelines because it's so variable, and there's really no specific guidelines out there. But this is where talking to each other helps, talking to me, talking to Sherry. But it really depends on, are you on injections or are you on a pump? Without sounding biased towards the T-Slim, overall, insulin pump therapy does allow for a more flexible lifestyle. Not just the T-Slim, but any insulin pump. Because it allows you to, really just reduce everything or increase anything on the fly. So it's great when you're exercising. But it can still be done with injections. When it comes to boluses, you can reduce your boluses when you're eating 1 to 2 hours before. And that'll help as long as you're working out within the 1 or 2 hours. And the reason why we say 1 or 2 hours is because that's when your insulin's peaking. Okay? Remember, if you go low right now, it's not the insulin that's going in your body right now that made you go low. It's the insulin from about an hour and a half ago that is making you go low right now. So I know, how many people here are on pumps? Okay, a good like 75% of you. So yeah, it's very common practice. I always hear people saying, I disconnected my pump when I went low. Well, but why? Because, it makes sense if you're having a really bad day. Okay, maybe suspend for a little bit. But remember, why you're low or why you're high is not from the insulin you're getting now. It's from before. So therefore, when you're going to reduce your bolus, you have to plan ahead ideally. So maybe an hour, hour and a half, reduce your bolus, because then when the insulin's peaking, it's going to be when you're working out, and then it'll be peaking at a lower level because you've now reduced it. So that's for both food and basal. That can help as well. If you're on injections, you can't adjust your long-acting, so you will have to eat through it. And that's okay. It's just you have to just make sure to always eat through it, whereas you can reduce it for pump therapy and avoid eating all the time. And then always remember, too, you can also increase your insulin. Okay, some exercise will require more insulin. And again, that's a thought that's kind of taboo, but you have to remember you sometimes need insulin for your exercise. Okay, so this is my last set of tips. So I had told you, if there's anything you take away, it's kind of those first general commandments and then these kind of final things that, if anything, just make sure you eat your recovery meals and add protein. That's going to actually allow you to store your glucose a lot better and recover better than if you were just to eat carbs alone, okay? Use high glycemic foods like cereal in your recovery meal. That's like a perfect example of something to eat afterwards. And then the milk will have the protein, because that way it quickly gets in. If you're working out very soon after your last workout, like let's say you went to the gym Friday night, and then you're going to work out again early Saturday morning, you're probably not going to have that much time to replenish. So that's where you really have to focus on a good recovery meal and a good breakfast. If you've got about 24 hours between workouts, it's okay. You'll probably have enough time to kind of eat enough meals and snacks. But if you've got 8 hours or less between workouts, or those of you who end up training for Ironman where you're training twice a day in the morning and at night, you have to really be on point with your eating to restore those glycogen stores. And then remember, you don't have to eat a lot on the days you don't work out. Although we want to. But that's also another thing that contributes to weight gain. We think we're training intensely, 3 out of the 5 days a week, and then the other 3 days we're still eating a lot. And really, you don't need to eat as much on the days that you don't train as much. Just snack all the time. That's a great way to get in all those carbs that you're going to need. Eat around your planned exercise. Mouth rinse. as we mentioned quickly before, just that mouth rinse itself during your workout can really help with your central nervous system and thinking you have food. And then be cautious of alcohol, because when you guys know the effects of alcohol on your blood and with insulin. And then usually when people have alcohol, obviously I'm not saying don't have any, but you just gotta be careful, because usually people will displace food for alcohol. So you won't end up eating in full recovery. And then the next day, the effects of alcohol can really, really linger on. So, whatever, right? Who am I? You guys know. Just alcohol in general, if you're trying to train seriously, can definitely affect it. And I don't have to probably tell you guys that. Feel free to contact me if you guys have any questions. I'm done. I've kept you guys way too long. Thanks, guys.